I am Nicole.
And I'm Steph.
Welcome to the Ego Drop podcast, where we are learning about how our egos affect our lives. How's the past couple of weeks been, Steph?
Yeah, we've been all right, I think. Yeah, how about you?
Yeah, not too bad. Loving the fact that the sun's out. Happy about that. You know me. Love the sun, love the warmth, that good
Yeah,
stuff. All is well, thank you.
good, good.
So, how has your ego affected you in the last couple of weeks, Steph?
Um, it's hard to say actually. I have had a really, really busy couple of weeks. Lots of like socializing. We've had a work get together. I've met, Karen, who was on our well-being episode. We had a little meet up for a weekend, and then I've had lots and lots of work to do, and I don't know, I'm sure this must be unhealthy in some ways, but do you know when you try and cram everything in and you give yourself like a self-imposed deadline? So by, I think it was Thursday night, I decided that jobs A, B, and C had to be done, and I wasn't going to sleep until they were done. And I ended up working till 5 past midnight because I'd got, to be fair, they were high pressured jobs. They did need to be done by the end of the week.
Yeah.
And so I stayed up really, really late to get them all done. And then obviously Friday, I spent absolutely exhausted as a result. So I presume that's got to be a negative ego putting that much pressure. But then on the flip side, it also made me achieve quite a lot, and they were jobs that had been stressing me out all week. So I don't know where the balance lies between that being a positive or a negative thing. Negative in terms of health because of the sleep side of things, and I couldn't go for my big run yesterday because I was so exhausted, but then healthy because I'd got all these awful jobs and they were no longer on my desk. So go figure.
So you achieved, but it's a little bit of both, maybe, it's.
And I could go into the weekend
knowing. It's a little bit of that, and it helped you to, because I guess now that you've achieved everything, you might have been a bit tired yesterday and you couldn't do your big run, but you've done everything. Now you can enjoy, the rest of your weekend, so on, and you can have some extra sleep if you wish.
Yeah, exactly. So how about you? If you reflect on the last couple of weeks, how's your ego been, do you think?
It's been probably similar to yours, somewhere in the middle. I've just been mega busy, and I'm happy, I'm grateful. So I'm not going to complain at all. You know what I mean? I've been inundated with work.
Fantastic.
But I'm probably not as disciplined as you are in terms of I've got these things to do, and I'm gonna, get it done. Me, I will push. I stay up late, and maybe I'm floating on whatever I'm floating on now. So I stay up late every night trying to work. And it's a cycle of, so maybe mine is more negative than positive, but I'm in the same breath, I'm really I'm really grateful. I'm really grateful that I'm busy. I think one of my friends asked me how I was doing, and I said, I'm good. I'm busy, but I'm happy. Busy is good. And the sun's out, so I'm really, really happy, feeling great, in all honesty.
Good.
So my ego is in a good place. It's in a good place at the moment in time. And my battle is still ongoing with the gym. Still ongoing, but there we are.
But you've been this morning, so that's a big tick.
Exactly. So happy.
Good. So this week is the second part to our series on success. You may remember we interviewed Stu Biggs the other week, so we were looking at success from a man's point of view. This week we're going to introduce the female perspective, but beforehand I think we've had some interesting messages from our listeners. Nicole, did you want to pick one to look at?
Yeah, sure. I'll pick one out for you. And I'll read this one. Sure. So we had a message from a listener following our entrepreneur episode to say that she had reflected on her own growth. And in her early days in her business, she would feel inferior to competitors, and that it would only when she left that field and she continued to be contacted for work that she had realized her worth and how much she had to offer. Now, these days, her mind tries to take her back to the insecurity, but she checks herself and considers that to be a sign of a healthy ego. What do you think about that?
Oh, that's really, really interesting. It's like that self-talk, isn't it? Your
Yeah.
mind running over time and telling you can't do this, but actually she's understands now that she does have worth. Oh, that's fantastic. What an interesting reflection.
Yeah, amazing. I thought when I read that one, I was like, I really like this. Got to read
Yeah,
this.
you can relate to that, can't you?
Definitely, definitely.
Excellent.
Let's
Well,
see, let's see what or what our guest uh
ooh,
would say about, what she'd had to share. It'd be interesting to see whether or not any of these, issues, comes up,
yeah, absolutely. Well, before we introduce our guest, shall we take a quick break?
Yeah, sure. Why not? Welcome back to part two of today's episode where we're exploring ego and success. Shall we introduce our guest?
So I did toy about how I should introduce you today, whether I should introduce you as the juggling judge, whether I should mention Christmas parties past, but I think just like Ebenezer Scrooge, neither of us come out of that particularly well. So instead, I thought I'd look to your accolades. So she was the youngest female recorder of Birmingham, and when she took silk, she was the youngest criminal silk in the country. Now she is the youngest leader of the Midland Circuit. So please do welcome to the podcast, Michelle Healy.
Good morning. Thank you for
Hello.
having me.
What about the drumming judge?
The
The
drumming, yeah.
drumming judge, yes, we like it. Lots of different accolades we can address you. How are you, Michelle? Thank you for joining us.
I'm really, really chuffed to be here and to see you both. Thank you so much for having me. It's
Oh,
wonderful.
absolute
Oh,
pleasure. Absolute pleasure.
so much. So can I first, pop off with my question? And I want to ask you, what is life like as a judge in a criminal court right now?
It's very difficult, I think, for all judges because people who aren't aware, there's a huge backlog in the criminal justice system. This has been caused by, quite frankly, decades of underinvestment and cuts and the closure of court centres. So you've got 60,000 cases currently waiting to get on. So I personally, I prosecute and defend, and I've got cases that have already been booked into my diary for 2026. So I think there's a real sense of frustration and of helplessness. Where are we going with this? How do we even begin to reduce the backlog? And everyone, I think, is probably feeling the pressure.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
Have you?
when you call, if I just pop in with a little question, because you can see it, because of course I appear before yourself, Madam Recorder, on many occasions, and you can see it in terms of the pressure when the listing, you can see the listing, and I'm thinking, how does a judge actually work through a list, of that magnitude in a day? When I see some of the list, I'm thinking, wow, how do you get through it? So sorry, that's another question I think I wanted to
I
ask.
think it's easier if you are you have a criminal background
Mm,
because in my day job I am doing the short hearings and doing sentences, so you're very familiar with the process. If you take judges, for example, who sit part-time but they maybe have a civil background, they haven't got that familiarity, so it's very hard for them. Judges, I think, are doing a lot of reading late into the night to make sure that they are on top of cases, but there's a real sense of duty there for them and that they want to do their bit to work as hard as they can to try and get through the cases. We need to try and embrace technology as a practitioner. As I'm sure you, Nicole, will agree, you cannot be in two, three places at once. So using the remote technology has been a real boon to combat the lack of advocates that there are in courts and get them so that each hearing ultimately is effective because you've got barristers there to help people and to help the judges.
mm, all right.
How much of your time now do you get to spend doing what you call the day job, as a
It,
barrister rather than judge?
um, the majority of my time is the day job because I'm feeling the competing pressures. there are my day job tends to be the most serious of offences, so rapes and murders, and they are the cases that tend to get heard as a priority because you've got custody time limits if somebody's in jail waiting for their trial for a murder, for example. If it's a rape case, you've got a complainant who's waiting for the trial to get on. So the courts, if they can, try and prioritise those. Because of that, if I'm prosecuting or defending, those are the cases that are taking priority in my diary. So 90% of my time, I would say, is doing the day job.
And have you been involved in any big or interesting cases recently that the listeners might be interested in?
Well, I've just finished the prosecution of two 12-year-olds who were convicted of murder. Sadly, they are the youngest killers since the Bulger killers, and have also now another sad historical fact, the youngest knife killers in history. So that was a case, it brought a lot of pressure emotionally. So I'm a mom, I've got two boys myself, and it's very difficult sometimes to try and demarcate the professional life and the home life. Yeah, this job takes it out of you, as I'm sure you both well know.
Definitely.
I want to ask you a question. Of course, from the outside looking in, we can easily look at someone and say he or she is successful. Yeah, we'll base that on whether it's the cases that, for example, you do the high level cases that you do, juggling your personal your practice versus that of being a recorder judge, a part-time judge. So from outside looking in, I'd say clearly you're successful. On paper, it looks that way from the outside. But what does success mean to you?
It's a really difficult question. I mean, the letters, so being called a KC, when I started out in this job as a pupil, that to me was the pinnacle of the career. That's what I aimed for. And I achieved that in 2017. I was absolutely over the moon, and I still pinch myself daily. But it made me realize that actually I was starting out then as a baby silk. So success now means, okay, if somebody is accused of the most serious crime, or if the prosecution wants somebody to prosecute the most serious crime, success to me would be that they think, okay, is Michelle available? So being the go-to person, and I haven't achieved that. There's still so many amazing silks out there that I'm just struggling to keep up with them and to keep proving myself. And I don't know how much of that is imposter syndrome, or as a woman, how much we doubt ourselves. We perhaps don't have the innate confidence of some of our male counterparts sometimes. So yeah, yes, on paper I'm successful, and I'm very grateful for everything that I've been able to do, but I'm not stopping just yet.
That's good to hear.
And I want to tag on to that first question I asked. Do you consider yourself successful?
Yes, I think that feels really weird to say that, because it feels like you're boasting. But yes, I've achieved what I wanted to achieve. That doesn't mean I don't want to go further. But at this stage, I feel like I've done what I set out to do as a baby barrister.
Just on the back of that, I don't know if it is something about criminal lawyers in particular, but we always tend, or at least a section of us, always tend to not want to big up our achievements. So obviously, as you guys know, until fairly recently, I had my own law firm, but I never would want to tell anyone that that's what I had, because as soon as you do that, again, you feel sort of boastful and it's ridiculous, really. It's an achievement, but I don't know why we sort of want to hide in the shadows somewhere. I don't know if that's because of the nature of the work we do, or
I think the attitudes at court, it's frowned upon to boast about yourself. I think also as a woman, I do think that we don't shout perhaps about ourselves and our achievements in the same way that, again, some men do.
Yeah, I agree, because I was going to say, when Steph mentioned about the profession, I was thinking more it was about gender. As women, we tend to small up ourselves. We make ourselves small to
That's a very good point.
We're here, but we're not really here. We don't want to be noticed. We need to just, I don't know what that is, but
It's
welcoming,
probably- So, of course, this podcast explores ego. So, what does ego mean to you?
Ego for me is somebody walking into court and being so confident in their own abilities that they haven't perhaps prepared the case as well as I have done, because they just think, I'm so good, I don't need to do that. Ego is very, very dangerous, I think, because it gives you a level and a veneer of confidence that can sometimes mask over other failings. I don't like ego, but it's a really tough balancing act, because I think you do need a level of confidence to do the job well. Your client wants you to sound confident on their behalf, and it's about getting that balance right, which is difficult.
Yeah, definitely.
I want to tag on to that question, to what you've just said. You said, I don't like ego. And can you think the reason? Okay, let me rephrase the question. Do you think you don't like ego because you view it in a negative way?
Yes, I think ego does have negative connotations. If you think about the context in which it's talked about, it's like, oh, somebody's got a big ego. It's like, oh, they're getting too big for their boots. And that comes back to the point that Steph just made about you don't want to shout about your achievements because you don't want to be seen in that light. Actually, I've learned now, actually, it's far better to not boast about what I've done or what I've achieved, but to let other people find out and then come to me. And that's actually become far more satisfying in a way. Like if someone else recognizes that I have done something, and that means a lot more.
Yeah. So I want to ask you, has ego affected you positively or negatively in the recent past?
My ego or someone else's ego?
Well, you can elaborate on both.
Um, I think some of my opponents, I'm generally now against other silks, the vast majority of whom are men, and I find that there are some who are incredibly patronizing towards me, and that's because their lives they haven't been challenged. They've just coasted through, and they think a huge amount of themselves, and then they come into court and they sort of, try belittle me, and that is all stems from their own super ego, and I find that very difficult to deal with sometimes and quite frustrating. So all I have to do is sort of try and just meet that and prove myself in my own way without letting my frustration show. um, I think having my own ego, yes, of course, everyone does have an ego, but what brings you down to earth is you have a case, you get an amazing win, and then the next week you lose a case. And I'm always trying to question myself. Did I lose that? Was I complacent in any way before going into that case because I had this bounce of confidence from the previous case? What could I have done better? And I think you've got to try and check and balance yourself almost. It's very easy to think, oh, yeah, I got that win, I'm brilliant. But if you do that, you have to accept that it's your fault if you lose. Whereas actually, whatever side we're on, we are only ever representing and putting forward the facts of our own case. And the facts sometimes are with you, the facts are against you. I can do my best to present those facts to the best of for my case, but I can't change the facts. And actually, perhaps my ability doesn't contribute as much as I think it does to a win or a loss. And I found that's actually a bit of a healthier way of looking at it. So I don't congratulate myself on the highs too much, but then I try not to let myself get beaten up when I lose a case.
Yeah. So it's just staying level-headed, because the next case is coming up and you just gotta get ready for the next and not get too excited about the last.
Yeah, I mean, you can't help it though sometimes. There are still cases that I just keep replaying over thinking, oh God, did I do everything I could have done in that case? Could I have done it better? Um, and that's dangerous because you dwell on it, but then at the same time, I try not to think, oh yeah, that was a brilliant result. Hopefully, it's not all just down to me.
I, I know you've answered the question about how egos affected you positively and negatively, but you've answered it from a professional standpoint. Can I push you to reflect on a personal level to see how it's affected you negatively or positively in your personal life? If you can think of an instant, fine. If you can't, then we'll just move on.
Oh,
In the grocery shop, in the garden center.
yeah, there's a I because of the nature of the cases that I do, my cases appear in the paper quite often, and they're on TV. And you sometimes, like, if something happens in a shop and, like, somebody's rude, or like at school, one of the moms a bit dismissive of you, and there's a part of me a little bit that wants to think, do you know who I am and what I've been doing? And that's really dangerous, because you you can start to think that you're better than someone, and you think that your job and your life is more important than anyone else's. But actually, you've got no idea what is going on in someone else's life, what personal things they're going through, what their job is. It could be a brain surgeon who's literally just saved somebody's life, and I'm thinking, God, what are they doing? They're taking my parking spot. And that's yeah, it's something I'm conscious of as my sort of profile has become a little bit higher. And there's a great judge in Leicester who's now retired, and his motto was, "Don't be a dick." Now, as mottos go for life, that's not a bad one. And I think if you can live by that, then maybe that's not a bad way to live. So yeah.
Fantastic motto. I should all have t-shirts with that emblazoned.
Well, I was going to say we should put that in the Robin room so that everybody who walks in, the chaps with a big ego, they can
Yeah.
see it. I think
But at least we've got a title for today's episode anyway.
I like it.
So, Michelle, you've obviously talked about some of the egos that you've come across in your sort of day-to-day working life. Now, I've had the privilege of knowing you since we were both sort of baby lawyers back in the day. And I know for a fact that you've met egos as you've attempted to climb the career ladder. Now, I'm not going to ask you to name names because, the motto we just talked about, but also, can you just think for a moment about how those egos affected you on what was a very sort of hard ladder to climb, and, you had to put a lot of hard work into that?
Yeah, what's been brilliant is, like, Steph, I've known you now for over 20 years, and it's terrifying, isn't it? But one of your former bosses, a wonderful, wonderful man called Lee Preston. He gave me a chance because he said he saw in you and saw in me a spark, and that was a sort of a groundedness, a determination to work hard. And I have felt challenged because some of my counterparts were given cases because they looked more like a barrister, and I've had people who don't want to instruct me because I look too young, or I'm not tall enough, and that's been incredibly difficult to deal with. And there was no easy solution. I could get upset about it, or I could do something about it. And the way I found to handle that was I just had to work harder. So I had to be the most prepared person in the room, anticipate, okay, what's the line of attack going to be? How can I make my speech better? And that was the only way to counter it. But there were wonderful older men who gave me a chance because they recognized the value of that hard work, and that hasn't always been the case. And it has been difficult to deal with sometimes.
I bet. And I have to say at that point, because you mentioned him, Lee Preston, who's sadly no longer with us, also recognised in Nicole the same sort of elements. And he's the reason I should say, that I came into contact with Nicole in the first place. I ended up recruiting her at an old firm because Lee told me to. So that's really interesting that he sort of,
as Michelle
one of the reasons we're all on screen together today.
Well, as Michelle said it, I was like, oh my gosh, he's the common denominator here in this, in this trio.
Yeah, he gave me some of the most serious cases, and gave me a chance. He gave me my first Crown Court briefs, and he was always a real champion of women's rights, and recognizing that it's not about gender or race or your accent. It was, are you going to work your hardest for my clients? And if it was a complete meritocracy, which is one of the things I love about the bar. You can get promoted just because you are good at what you do, not because of who daddy knew from school, things like that. And Lee was a real champion of that.
He really was. He called me Samantha for the first 6 months of my career, but I forgive him that.
Nah, he was a good guy. Having a big or inflated ego can affect your decision making. Have there been times in your career where your ego has inflated, or have you always managed to keep your ego in check? You know, has it ever affected you in a way you hold yourself in court? Yeah, affected you in the way you hold yourself in court, sorry.
I sometimes you think you are just absolutely right, and that has to be ego driven. It's like, yeah, I've read this law in one particular way, and it's only afterwards when the judges, talked it through with you and explained the law in a childlike language to me, and I've gone, ah, yeah, now I get it. And that's quite embarrassing. I had a horrendous experience in the Court of Appeal, um, where it was all to do with what the definition of somebody's intention was to make something a sexual assault. And the trial judge ruled one way, and I was confident the trial judge had got it right. And then the prosecution opposed that. And they took it to appeal, and the prosecution instructed Treasury Counsel. The Court of Appeal instructed somebody like an amicus to the court, and they were these amazing silks. And then I made my contribution, and the three judges just looked at me like I was a complete fool, and I added nothing of value. And I just thought, God, I've been so convinced of my own correctness, and actually stood back and analysed it, and it was quite humbling. And experiences like that keep you on the ground. So yeah, guess what? Don't tell my kids this, but I'm not actually always right.
Yeah, the deal, don't worry. You've already indicated a feeling sometimes that you have imposter syndrome, but can you think of examples where your ego has made you feel a little bit inferior?
Oh, yeah. Sometimes I have to go down to London, and walking into the Old Bailey, and all of a sudden I was surrounded by those like proper London barristers, and yeah, you go into the robing room, and they have a separate robing room for ladies and gentlemen at the Old Bailey. They're very traditional, and they're all these female silks, and they're just speaking so confidently, and I just stood there going, what am I doing here? Yeah, I felt so out of place. I'm very conscious. I've got a Brummie accent. I was very conscious of that. I felt very young. And when they saw me putting on my silks jacket, because silks wear different jackets to junior barristers. I could sort of see them looking at me thinking, what does she think she's doing putting on those clothes? And yeah, it was really, really humbling. And it was quite a difficult emotional case as well. And ended up being shouted at by the victim's family at court, and security having to become involved. And the whole process, I walked away feeling shattered by it. But again, actually it was the right result. It was a very sad case. And you try and have to tell yourselves that justice was done. But you do get those difficult days in court, and you just come home and yeah, you just want to cry.
Definitely, I can remember those, definitely.
Do you recognize ego issues in any of the defendants that appear before you?
Yes, so I defend cases privately, so that's people who don't want to have or don't qualify for legal aid, so they will pay privately for an advocate, and if they're paying privately, they will tend to go for a silk. Quite a few of them think that because they are paying for me, that they have a right to be acquitted. Like, well, I'm paying for you. You're paying for this result, and I deal with a lot of professionals, doctors, professors, people of that nature, police officers sometimes, and they again have a profound belief in their own innocence, despite, I'm afraid to say, sometimes the quite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. And that can be very, very difficult to manage, because you try to manage it on two levels. So the financial side of things, yes, they are paying for me to represent them, but actually from the legal side, I've got a duty to spell out what the case is, what they're charged with, and what the evidence is about that. And I think they find that quite difficult to deal with.
That's really interesting that you say that, because there is always a difference between a private paying client and a legal aid client. For me, as a defender, I always treated them the same. They got the same service. There wasn't, you know, a sort of second tier. If you pay me, I'm going to somehow be better for, you know, I always did my best regardless of the funding issue. But it's really interesting that you say that those that pay privately, not always, but sometimes think they're paying for an acquittal.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, I can't suddenly magic something up for you that I can't do for all my, you know, for some other clients. You're paying for me to defend you and
Yeah.
to try to get that acquittal if the evidence allows for it. But yeah, it's not some sort of magic one that you give me X amount of money and you're definitely going to walk out. So that's really interesting.
Yeah, I do quite a few advices on appeal. So somebody else has been represented at the Crown Court level, being convicted, and then they come to me for a second opinion. And I think some of those, because they are paying me, expect me to find something and say, oh yes, we can appeal this. And again, it doesn't work like that. I've got a duty to spell out what the chance of appeal are, what the facts are in this case, why there is or isn't an appeal. And some of them just don't take that very well against that real sense of expectation.
It's the same actually, even for legal aid clients and appeals. I think our we didn't, thankfully, touch wood, get many complaints in practice, but if we did, it was usually because somebody had instructed us under legal aid, so they hadn't paid privately. We'd taken a good look at the case, got very experienced appeal specialists who would go through with a fine-tooth comb. Sadly, more often than not, have to turn around and say there aren't grounds, because of course mostly judges do get it right. And they would complain that you hadn't got them a ground from somewhere, and obviously that's not the way it works. So
it's not particularly. I find it a lot in case of a sexual complaint.
Yeah.
Like, well, it was their word against mine. Like, yeah, that unfortunately that is just how it works. And they're saying, oh, yeah, she lied about this, or she said this. I'm sorry, if unless there's new evidence or legally something went wrong, it is so difficult to get leave to appeal in cases.
Or there's no forensics. That's what a lot of those sorts of offenders, and there's no forensics, therefore you can't prove anything.
Yeah.
Like, we had convictions before we had forensics.
Exactly. They struggle to get that. But from my standpoint as a junior, I feel so much pressure when someone's a private payer, you know, when they're private, you know, I guess with your experience, Michelle, you'd manage that probably much better. I just feel tremendous amount of pressure when someone's paying privately. And in all honesty, since I've gone freelance, whenever someone wants to pay me, and I've had a few who's wanted to instruct me on a private fee paying basis, Crown Court matters, and I've kind of just sent them to a firm and just kind of, because I just feel a sense of I'm going to be under so much pressure. Expectation is that you're going to get me acquitted.
Yeah.
And no, it's the evidence that speaks. And then I present your case as best as I can.
That pressure doesn't change in silk because if anything, so without getting grubby, we get paid more because we are a silk, and that of itself brings a different level of pressure. And usually the offences they tend to be serious sexual offences, so the consequences of a conviction are huge. So yeah, I still do feel it, I'm afraid, Nicole.
Yeah, okay.
Michelle, what sacrifices have you had to make for your success, and do you regret any of those with hindsight?
I don't regret them at all, but I don't have at the moment. I don't have any hobbies. So my present situation is that I'm leader of the Midland Circuit, which has been a great honour, but it entails lots of meetings, lots of emails, all of which take place after the normal court day. And I've got, so I've mentioned before, I've got two boys. I just about have time for them and for the day job and the circuit. And I regret that I don't have that, but I also recognise that some of the things it's enabled me to do and the people that I've met and the barristers I get to represent, that I wouldn't change that. I'm a great believer also in that things happen for a reason. So yeah, I wouldn't change anything. In my earlier years, I did a lot of acting, a lot of Amdram, and it was difficult sometimes of juggling the trying to have something outside of court. But what I find is that if you are prepared to make time to do something, then generally you will find the time, and it can be hard. But if you really want to do something, you will find the time to do it.
Yeah. If you were starting out in your career again, would you do anything differently?
I don't think I can say yes or no, because I'm only here because of the choices that I've made, and I
Yeah.
don't know where those other choices would have led me.
Mm.
Um, I want, no, I don't think I would have done anything different, because I feel very lucky to be where I am now. I love my job. Um, and who knows what would have happened. So no, stick with what I've got.
I think that's a fair answer. You've mentioned your two lovely boys. Can you, either as a woman or as a judge, can you have it all? Is that a lie we've been sold? Or is it possible, do you think?
Yeah, I think it is possible. Yeah, there's some really interesting articles. People strive for perfection. Do you know
Yeah.
what? You don't need to be perfect. It's not healthy to be perfect. What you need to be is good enough. And I think the boys can be listening outside. I think I'm a good enough mom. I take them to school when I can. They help them with their homework, talk to them in the day, talk to any problems. I'm quite lucky. We've got a very, very close relationship with both of them. I go to concerts, but I can't. I missed youngest's sports day this week because, hey, I'm in the middle of a murder trial. You can't do it all.
Mhm.
But that means am I being a good enough barrister? Again, I'm not a perfect barrister. I don't think such a thing exists. But am I good enough on that particular day in that particular case? And if you strive to be good enough at all those things, then yeah, I think you can have it all. I think it's a different pressure for women than it is for men. Nobody would expect dad to be there necessarily for sports day if they can't make it. It's like, oh well, no, he's in a murder trial. Whereas like, oh, you're not making it to sports day, and it's a different
Mm.
kind of a pressure. But if I'm realistic about that, then yeah, it's hard. Don't get me wrong, it's tiring, and there'll be times when you feel like you're being overwhelmed, but it
Yeah.
is doable.
Yeah. I mean, you've touched upon it, but I'll ask, are you able to spend quality time with the family, or do you lose a lot of family time with career? And I think you've,
I try and have one day a week when I'm not working. And I've got better at, like, when we go on holiday, for example, I've finally now learned to turn my emails off, and that took a long time to do that.
Me too. It's a revelation, isn't it?
Yeah, but then I realized, do you know what? People aren't going to die. It's
yeah,
it is okay. It can wait 2 weeks.
yeah,
Um, so some weekends are busier than others, but I always try and make sure that we do one thing as a family together. Um, yeah, it, it's a balance, but I'm in no worse position than a mom who is working 12 hours a day in a factory just to try and put food on the table for her kids. I'm in a far, far luckier position than someone like that. And
mhm,
let's have a bit of a reality check here. I've got a very nice life. I am very, very fortunate. And I think the kids see that.
okay.
So women have only been able to practice law now for a little over 100 years, and it's still, as we've already discussed today, a very male-dominated area. In fact, when I started my firm 7 years ago, I think I was one of the 33% of directors slash partners of law firms. So it's still quite a low figure. What do you think has made you able to succeed in this arena? And has there been times where you've been expected to act like a man in any way or change your persona a little?
I think two things have enabled me to like that. I've an overblown sense of confidence in my own ability.
Fantastic ego.
Um, I, when I said at the beginning, I always wanted to be a silk, and I genuinely believe that I could be. And a lot of women hold back on applying for things like silk or recorder because they think they're not quite good enough. Whereas I wasn't afraid to fail. So,
Mm,
okay, right, I want to do this. Let's give it a go. Having said that, I've also been able to do this because I've had the most amazing supportive husband. So when we had kids, he was the one who had maternity leave. He was a house husband for each of them for 2 years until they're old enough to go to nursery, and he has taken a back seat, but and kept things running at home. And I don't think many women are fortunate enough to have that. It sounds quite old-fashioned in some ways, oh, yeah, somebody keeping house, but actually having somebody who's always going to be at home, be there for the school run and everything else. If I have to go away to do a case, which I sometimes do, that has been invaluable. So a balancing of those two things has helped me.
Mhm. Are you content? Are you still striving for more success?
I never stop striving. It's always
Mhm.
what's next, what's next, what's next. I've got 3 months left of leader.
Oh, wow.
Um, and then who knows? Yeah, I don't, I'm 46 now, and there's no way that I am anywhere near done. I just don't know what the next step looks like. But I think I've always been like that. I've always been, yeah, I want the bigger case. I want to take the next step. I want to be at a higher grade CPS prosecution. That's just something that's inside me. And I can't see that ever changing no matter what I do. Probably not a very healthy attitude to say that actually, but but that's honestly who I am. I
Yeah.
just, yeah, it's always what's next, what's next.
Well, you've definitely got that get up and go, and it's going to be exciting to see where you go from here. But tell me, Michelle, are there any downsides to your success?
Um, some people I can be a bit jealous of it, and therefore you can get, you know, that people are sort of saying things behind your back, and that can be a little bit hurtful. You can sometimes become a little bit disconnected from the juniors because they don't feel they can speak to you, whereas actually I want to be approachable. I want to encourage people, particularly, younger women, to say, look, this is a job that we can all do. And then, as I mentioned before, it's I, at the moment I don't have a huge amount of a social life, and that, trying to schedule times to see my friends, that had to be scheduled sometimes months in advance. I hope that will get easier as the boys get older, because we're at that pressure point in our lives,
Mm.
aging parents, young children, and responsibilities to both. Um, and that will change, I hope, as I sort of hit my 50s.
I was going to say, I'm sure in February we said we needed to arrange a get together, and you said yes after Easter holidays, and we've both like, this is the first time we've probably actually spoken since then. So yeah, I
Yeah,
think we understand how busy you are.
but it's like, yeah, you've got kids at the weekend, so we've got a kids party this afternoon to go to, and then there's something on at school last weekend, and sometimes you just need to say, no, I just need a few hours by myself
I
to
think
stop.
no is the best word in the world when you learn to actually use it. It's so good for protecting your energy, isn't it?
It is, because otherwise you're starting Monday and you're just you're knackered going to court on a Monday morning, and that's not a great thing. But I try and want to do as much as possible with them, because I know that I've only got a finite length of time. My eldest is already 13. I mean, that's I don't know, right? It's gone
Forget
like
about when I
that.
was a baby. Where's that
Yeah,
time
where
gone?
has that time gone? It's crazy, isn't it?
I
So
also I also remember doing a hit session in your local leisure centre with you. Do you remember that? The memories flooding back. What were we thinking?
we've started a midlife crisis. We need to
Yeah,
lose weight and get healthy. As you
and
can see, that went well for me.
I think I stopped answering your calls after that experience.
Poor Xavier.
Do you have any tips, Michelle, for anyone starting out in law or studying law currently or striving for success more generally?
If you're studying law, the best thing to do if you want to be a barrister is actually just go to court. You learn far more from being at court and watching other barristers do it than you do from the academic study. Also, as a junior barrister, there is literally no substitute for hard work. So prepare the case. When I was my pupil masters, they were then called, I got all of his cases and wrote a case summary for them, because that taught me a good discipline of knowing how to understand a case. If you're doing a sentence, try and get into the habit of always doing a sentencing note, because it helps you sort of put things in your mind, and a judge will be very appreciative of it as well. So yeah, work hard, but don't take yourself too seriously. You know, this job, you need a sense of humor to get through it, and don't be a dick.
Don't be a dick. Nicole, I don't know about you, but what Michelle said there about going to court and watching other barristers, I think that was invaluable to me. I mean, I was lucky enough to be a trainee at the time when solicitors still got paid to go to the Crown Court and sit behind counsel. And although, of course, the procedure differs slightly between the Crown Court and the Magistrates' Court, the amount I learned from about how to handle yourself in court, about how to deal with clients who we know sometimes in high states of emotion and things like that, and just sort of the attention to detail as well. I learned so much from that experience. I don't know about you, Nicole.
No, absolutely right. I've got to agree with you, because back in those days, I spent most of my time in the Crown Court behind counsel. I think the one thing, though, I say to myself time and again is, if I could go back to those days, I certainly would have planned myself, my mind differently, because those days you were taking notes, weren't you? You were there to support the barrister, and between the barrister and the client. So I was so busy taking notes that sometimes I think I missed some, bits and pieces that I could really learn. So, but I've learned a lot for sure. I remember one of the things one barrister said to me years ago, about defense statements. And she said to me, you draft the defense statement. And I was like, but you're the barrister. You should, in my head, I'm thinking that, I didn't say it out loud. And I said, I thought barristers are supposed to do it. She says, no, you're going to learn so that when you decide to come here, you'll be all right. Literally. And from that time onwards, I've always drafted defense statement whilst I'm in a role of a solicitor. I'm supporting a barrister. I've always done it since then. So I've been learning a lot. And I definitely agree that, sitting in court, so much to learn. And even sometimes when I'm in court now and I'm not dealing with my case, I'm waiting. And let's say if a silk is in there or somebody's in there who's very experienced, I listen to what they're, how they're presenting whatever arguments they're advancing, because I believe I'm always learning.
Yeah.
I'd certainly like to make some time to sit behind Michelle to, pick up the hone my skills.
Teach you how to juggle.
Well, on that note, my next question was going to be about hobbies, but you've already mentioned you don't have time for hobbies. Do you have any practices or anything that you run through that helps you to keep that ego in check?
Yeah.
To make sure you're not comparing yourself to others and things like that.
Every night before I fall to sleep, I make sure I list at least 3 things that I'm grateful for.
Oh, fantastic.
It just keeps you, you have to be humble. I'm incredibly fortunate person, and I need to recognize that, and to thank whatever being for what I've done. So always I take time to do that, and then I try and read every night as well, just a novel, chapter or two, just to separate the end of a busy day to bedtime, and just calm myself down. And then I keep a diary. I've kept a diary since I was 12 years old, every night, and it's just nice to sort of to look back, and there's some days were dark days, and you think, okay, remember how you felt at that time, but then there's another day, and you get through it one step at a time. Yeah.
Will we ever see the memoirs of
No.
recording? No.
No. Not if I don't want to get sued.
Now I want to see them.
I'm sure you do.
You've written an alias. I want to thank you so much for sharing your success story with us, and then reflecting on your own ego journey. Truly are grateful for that. And of course, to our listeners, if you want to join the conversation or share your success stories reflecting on ego, please email us at theegodrop@gmail.com. Also, please find us on all socials, that being TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, X, we're everywhere, The Ego Drop. And of course, we're on Apple and Spotify and all the other podcasts that you listen to your content. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time. I'm recording
Thank
here.
you, Michelle.
Thank you so much for having me. Cheers, both.
Bye.